Okay, good afternoon. My name's Rob Line. I'm Vice President of Global Talent Mobility at Cartus. Your choice to spend an hour with us at this virtual forum on coronavirus and its impact on global mobility is very much appreciated. So thank you very much to all who've taken the time to attend. In a moment, I will pass over to my colleague Al Zone, who will take you through the agenda for the hour, and he will introduce the presenters as well. But first, it's true to say that there's a lot of information, data, news, potentially fake news too, to process during this very uncertain time. And so Cartus has begun a series of virtual forums to address the impact of coronavirus on global mobility programs. For Asia, this is the first one, but there will be more, the schedule to be determined, but regular. One challenge for us all as mobility professionals is to sift the information that's coming at us from all over the place and sort actionable intelligence at this time. So information needs to be packaged for stressed line managers, anxious or confused assignees, and of course for us as we continue to move mobility forward in this space. So that's the aim for today, is to provide some actionable intelligence to you and, of course, to facilitate some sharing as well among peers. Let me quickly address some housekeeping items. Please could everybody mute their phones? That would be much appreciated. In our experience, the best way to ask questions or to make comments will be through the chat feature on Teams, which is highlighted on the slide here. Anyone joining via audio only, and there are probably a couple of you guys, may not be able to see the screen or will not be able to see the screen. So I would request that you email Rachel Fu at cartus.com and she can immediately send you a copy of the presentation. Let me spell that out as well. Rachel's spelling of Rachel is slightly different to some other Rachels. So RACHEAL.FOO at cartus.com. One more time, RACHEAL.FOO at cartus.com. This event is being recorded, and a copy of this will be sent to participants. And of course, you know that you can join anonymously as well. With that, Alzone, I will pass the time over to you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Rob. I hope everyone can hear me properly.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Right. As Rob had mentioned, my name is Alzone. Together with him, we lead the global talent mobility business in APAC. I have been in Cartus for almost 15 years, and I have been fronting COVID-19 discussions for more than 3 months, or what felt like 3 years on some days. Thank you again for joining us. Usually we try to do all these things in person, typically, go into a meeting venue. Unfortunately, very strange times. More than half of humanity are being requested to stay at home at this moment. And, that includes all of us here. In the midst of what I think businesses and people are facing around the world, we are aware that planning for COVID-19 and the implications for our employees and businesses have become a core part of our day job. Therefore, our presenters today, as we take you through the agenda, they are going to share how mobility teams around the world have been responding to this ever-evolving situation. They will provide an overview of the impact seen on global mobility programs. And I think it's important to know that while COVID-19 is our reality now, this is an event-triggered crisis, and we know that this event will pass. And it is likely that the recovery thereafter will differ from country to country or even continent to continent. So faced with that possibility, I think we want to get people started on thinking about how organizations can continue to stay nimble and agile in managing your mobile workforce. And I think a good first step in staying ahead of the curve, as some parts of the world, we're starting to see them recover from the after effects of the pandemic. Our presenters today are the ones that's going to do most of the talking, Jolene and Rudy. They are our directors who are leading service delivery teams for our clients in APAC. In their roles, they oversee the health of the client relationships for their portfolios, and they maintain responsibility for our operations team in region. Each of them has more than 15 years of experience in the industry. And like me and probably everyone else on this webinar, they have been in the thick of consulting and managing COVID-19 contingencies for the past 3 months. As they're presenting, we ask that you continue to mute your audio during this session. There's a number of attendees on this webinar. In fact, I could see someone requesting for everyone to just mute their phones. So if you do have questions, do submit your questions to us throughout the session using the chat function over there. Another one of our directors, Catherine Aspirin, or Casper for short, will be monitoring those comments and questions throughout the session. Casper will come in at the end to facilitate our Q&A, and we'll aim to get through as many of those questions as possible. And in the event that we are unable to address them today, we will do that post-session. Okay, so with that said, over to you, Rudy.
Thanks, Alson. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great, super. So I hope you're keeping well, and thank you for joining us as we kick off our Global Mobility Insight webinar series. So we'll be looking at the COVID-19 pulse check. So this is basically the first edition. So it gives you a quick insight based on what we've heard on the ground in partnering with our clients. So the results here are based on more than 50 respondents. So for the one who are following up outside of Teams, I just want to call out that we are looking at slides 5 and 6. So this post check address some key topics that global organizations are dealing with as they take an agile approach and cater basically to the needs of their mobile workforce. So that includes, as you can see on the slide, the change of communication protocol, relocation planning, short-term or long-term relocation allowance adjustment or not, and also managing internship program. So now, as I mentioned, this is the first edition, and I want to call out that we will continue to keep you updated on trends and best practices to support you in managing your global mobility program. So as Alzona has mentioned, any question or if you have any input, feel free to use the chat box to do so. So now I would like to draw your attention to some of the areas that stand out on the slide. So in particular, the communication piece. So for the one on the phone, I want to describe what that means. So at a time when the world is in crisis and teams are working remotely, the needs of effective communication is greater than ever. So 78% of our clients have increased communication to daily or even bi-weekly to monitor the evolving situation and keep their stakeholders updated. So clearly here, communication is key during this time as we ensure that the mobile workforce are kept up to date and can easily reach out for question and clarification. So this is whether this is via an email, individual phone call, or video conference, especially at the time where there is a social distancing put in place and you are required to stay at home for us in Singapore and work remotely. What we have seen so far, at least personally, in terms of the clients that we are managing, they provide clear and very detailed guidance, whether it's via email or via a group chat or a video call. And also they provide clear next step in case if an employee is infected by the coronavirus as part of their commitment towards the safety and security of their employees. I can see this is very nicely put together. This is very nicely laid out for them for easy kind of self-serve internally. They also share emergency contact, router box for any question or concern during this time. So there is this reassurance piece that I believe is important with our client following up closely on the COVID-19 development, and they are also meeting regularly to review the situation. So just to kind of share what Cartus is doing on our end. So because we are all on a on a BCP, or most of us are, teams are meeting on a daily basis to understand what's on their action items or brainstorm how we can best support and partner with our clients, but also checking up on every employee to ensure on their well-being as well. So during this BCP phase, we emphasize to use video conferencing tool as well to virtually keep in touch. So that's basically on the communication part. Relocation planning obviously is a big chunk of the post check here. Some insight as to how global organizations are reacting to the pandemic. So notice the high percentage in regards to international assignment being on hold, and also employees not declining future assignment. So you can see that on the question specific to our organization, global international assignment currently on hold, 76% of our clients have put their assignment on hold for at least 13 days. So that's not a surprise with the travel restriction put in place, the border closure, the quarantine, and also the lockdown in most of the APAC location. I would like to draw your attention also to the 88% in regards to whether organizations have seen an increase of employee declining the option of future assignment due to the fear of relocating internationally at this time. At least for now, the 88% is the response of the organizations. This is encouraging, basically looking at the percentage that the majority of the employees are sort of waiting for this to pass. I believe this conveys most companies wait and see kind of mode they are on right now and behavior. Lastly, at the bottom on the question about our organization evacuating their assignee from host location, you can see that 7% of assignees has chosen to self-evacuate it, so that's very minimal. To add to that, I've seen some clients putting in place some flexibility around the use of relocation-related travel benefits, such as, for example, using their home leave earlier than expected if the expat feels insecure and want to travel home. And the 80% of organizations have not evacuated assignee. This kind of show that the majority of the companies have most expat remaining in a host location. So if you have any comments as to how you have handled this situation or any input, feel free to use the chat box, and we can look back to this at the end of the session. Moving on to the next slide, specifically to
Rudy.
Yes?
Just a minute. So I just want to make sure that everyone can see what we're flashing. We're currently on the Global Mobility Pulse Check results. I think I see a comment that someone's just seeing the agenda page on the screen. That's probably an indicator that the screen is frozen for that individual. But we're currently right now on the Global Mobility Pulse Check results. So if you're not seeing that, please let us know via that chat function. And maybe what we can do is to, make sure that our marketing manager is able to send a soft copy of the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Azun.
Yep.
All right, so now we are on the slide 6, which talks basically about the relocation allowances. So in a nutshell, 28% of the organization have temporarily implemented or increased the hardship allowance in some locations. And 86% of organizations have temporarily honoring full host country allowances and benefit for their assignee who have returned back home during this pandemic. So I think the 86% that we are looking at in terms of the honoring the host country or on assignment allowances, I think we are looking, for example, at host country housing and transportation support, for example, which are things that are ongoing, especially for long-term expats. And also importantly, the education piece. So for international schools, although those have, for the majority, have closed and provide online tuition, they still require full payments, whether it's for the remainder of the year or even what I've heard as early as for the next year. So it's important, and I've seen we're basically seeing the majority of the organization continuing to provide that host country support. The 28% of the increase in hardship allowances in certain location, this sort of tied up with what Erin has shared in the latest survey. whereby they mentioned that 80+% of companies are not paying an additional or a temporary hardship for expat to remaining in a host location. So what we are seeing here in this project kind of match what we've seen from Eric as well. It is also worth mentioning that in regards to the internship program, so in a nutshell, 88% are basically not canceling their internship program at this time. And they are mainly building strategy to leverage technology to support intern training and onboarding. So I think they're kind of looking at alternate methods in order to kind of meet the intent of their internship program. So as we continue to partner with our clients and provide the guidance needed, the COVID-19 crisis continues to evolve in cities and countries all over the world, but specifically here for APAC. So you will see future post chat or surveys coming up. So in the meantime, if you want to get the latest in terms of our content, feel free to log onto our website. We have a COVID-19 content hub that provides you with additional best practices, resources, and insights. You can also reach out to your Cartus representative for any guidance as usual. Okay. Moving on to this, the second segment of our webinar in regards to the impact and best practices for global mobility programs. So as global mobility managers and teams navigate the various issues related to COVID-19, so let's take a look at some of the major policies areas that have been impacted over the last couple of weeks or months and what we know today. So the caveat here is that because of the fluidity of the situation, as you know, some of the recommended approaches noted here may change as the situation evolve in the next coming days or weeks. So we have published a white paper a couple of days ago that called out the key impacted relocation component from tax, household goods, destination services, additional costs, even language and cross-cultural. But for the purpose of this webinar, I would like to draw your attention to 4 areas. In particular, what we call the logistical triangle around household goods, temporary living, and destination services. And we also included immigration here just as a key highlight. So let's start with immigration. So obviously there are some delays in immigration processing due to the changing condition. So this is not in our control. Processing time have been delayed depending on the APAC location due to the changing market condition and also because of the government office closure. So the best practice here. It is important that as part of your talent mobility strategy and planning that your immigration provider provide weekly updates for upcoming deliverables in the view of all those evolving changes. So we work closely with Fragment and also Newland Chase, who provides daily update on COVID-19 immigration impact. So those are reviewed on a daily basis, which is very useful for our operation team. So you can basically refer also to the Fragment COVID-19 link or the Newland Chase coronavirus link, which focus exclusively on topics that are caused by or related to the virus. Household good delays as well or cancellation due to the limited shipping line or even available to air freight shipment. So obviously, as you know, this may cause fluctuation in direct costs due to the supply and demand. There are also global extension to custom clearance due to the slowdown from short staff agencies. Furthermore, due to the country shutdowns for some location, deliveries may be postponed. And hence the need for additional storage time. So the best practice here where available will be for suppliers to complete virtual service to keep the process moving. So work closely with your Cartus representatives to kind of strategize on move on a case-by-case basis. That's also the recommendation here. Temporary living, we are seeing more restriction being placed on entry on a property by property basis. So this probably will continue to change and likely will vary country to country if it does. End of assignment, extension, localized move may be subject to travel restriction, quarantine, or government guidelines. The best practice for temporary living is assess ahead of time, really prepare and proactively extend as needed as you want to mitigate a situation where you're not able to renew the temporary lodging. So Cartus will assist in reviewing extended temporary accommodation option on a case-by-case basis. So continue to work closely with your Cartus consultant or Cartus representative. The good news on temporary living is, based on what I've seen, we still have a healthy supply of housing option in the region. Last but not least, destination services. The face-to-face delivery may not be feasible in many locations, and we can all appreciate that. So the best practice around that is basically DSP will communicate and provide most of the information over the phone or online. So we kind of have some virtual e-orientation regarding key information on education, housing, and other resources related to the host location. Okay, so there's definitely much more in terms of the impact and best practice that we have published in our white paper. So I encourage you to have a look at it. I think those are quite good and will be reviewed and kept up to date as we move forward with our webinar series. So this segment is done, and I would like now to give the airtime to Jolene for the last segment of the webinar.
Thanks, Rudy. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to take you through the next segment in terms of agility in managing a mobile workforce. Given all that we've seen and heard earlier in Rudy's presentation on the Mobility Pulse survey, as well as the impact and best practices recommendation, we now need to adapt and look forward to see how we can better manage our talent mobility during the COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, mobility teams need to change the way they lead through their mobility programs they are offering or supporting. There is a need to relook and take greater consideration into the overall process, timeline, and costs. There is a need to reset expectations and assess feasibility and criticality given the limitations of allowed movements by governments across the globe. As we've seen, a lot of countries are now going into shutdowns. While most companies have placed their mobility programs on hold for at least the next 30 days, there's still quite a number, about at least 30% of companies who are still pushing ahead with their relocations due to business needs or talent needs. Should this happen, or companies are probably looking to prepare for day one post-COVID at host location, here are some of the considerations that needs to take place. So business planning. To effectively manage a relocation, several sources now need to be verified. We're looking at government rules, travel bans. Immigration and security teams now play a much larger role as they need to help in the overall strategy planning. Security regulations need to determine if the relocation of employee is admissible and safe. There is a greater duty of care required by most companies. It's not all about employees' availability or their wants to move at this point in time. By partnering with Cartus, we will be able to provide you with further insights on what's happening on the ground, the support services that continue to be rendered. And we also need to take into consideration the new timeline, impact on costs, as well as potential process application. Immigration obviously plays a huge part in this, and business planning can essentially be extended by an additional 2 weeks due to additional protocols. As for counseling, we now need to ensure there's a lot more care and empathy taken, given there is a lot of anxiety felt by relocating employees. Relocation is, obviously, we understand, is a very stressful process, and now couple it with the furthermore uncertainties at new locations, it could cause much more stress. All exceptions should be pre-aligned with key stakeholders and reviewed at a policy level, or reviewed with scenario-based examples. This is to ensure that all the partners on the ground are also aligned with what's allowed and what isn't. Cartus will be able to coordinate with our downstream partners to deliver services accordingly following the counseling. While we do not expect an extension of time taken for counseling to take place, we understand that the behind-the-scenes decision-making to go on a location could definitely take a much longer time now. some of the pre-departure works that needs to be taken into consideration. So depending on government regulations, movement can only take place when restrictions are lifted at both departure and destination locations. Services may be delayed, limited, and these are to be expected. Most countries likely cannot deliver face-to-face DSP services, such as home finding. Hence, we now may need to rely on virtual supports. En route travel booking can also be challenged, with most airlines grounding their air flights. Shipment planning now needs more time due to oversubscription, limited air freight, availability of containers, as well as reduced manpower. We will need to prepare critical items. For example, allow for excess baggage. This is to take into consideration longer transit time for shipment. Overall, the pre-departure service or pre-departure process now requires an additional 2 to 3 weeks, as this is directly impacted by local measures in place. As your employees move into the destination phase, we do expect a lot of quarantine requirements for most locations. And even if your employees are allowed to enter the country, there could be additional quarantine time or restriction matters. Virtual onboarding on company procedures should take place to ensure that the employees are part of the host BCP planning. Temp living will also likely require extensions. So just think about it. If a country has just lifted their restrictions, many companies could also, like yourself, be thinking of relocating their employees to the host at the same time. Markets need time to recover, and the number of available properties for home search could be limited. Additionally, it could be a new norm to limit physical contact, which means we now relook at how home finding needs to take place, as well as lease negotiations. Shipments, as we've mentioned several times, would likely take a much longer time to arrive. So these essentially can drag destination programs for an additional 2 to 8 weeks or even more. The businesses now need to be aware and understand that the extended timelines are non-controllables, and they just have to be prepared that these delays will be reflected as additional costs. As part of the ongoing support, companies can also take into consideration those that are in the midst of relocation and assignment. They can consider forms of exceptions, example like what Rudy has shared, looking to additional home leaves by permitting them to seek safe shelter in their home country. Additional support for temp living extensions, it could be in full or split 50-50 if the host housing is the employee's responsibility. It is definitely critical to ensure that there's full BCP planning at the host location, not only to help your foreign talents, but also your local employees. We do recommend companies to work with their data provider to keep up to date with host allowances that likely need to be adjusted during the pandemic period. But based on the data, we also understand that at least 80% of the companies are not paying hardship allowances for the employees who are currently remaining at host location. We also recommend that you review with your healthcare provider if coverage needs to be adjusted. For those who are in the epicenter, companies can conduct a review if early repatriation is necessary, or perhaps consider a temporary repatriation to the home location just to ease the stress of anxieties of employees. With this, I hope that you find some of the tips useful as you look to replan your mobility policies and programs by taking into consideration all the new obstacles that are currently in place due to COVID-19. It is important that we be nimble and agile as we adapt and adjust our expectations with managing the mobile workforce during this volatile period. And then, if there's no further questions, I would hand this off to Casper, who has kindly taken down some of the questions.
Right. Hi, everyone. So when I check the chat box, again, I just want to remind everyone who's participating, with all the content that has been shared. If you have any questions specific to the presentation that has been shared or any additional questions that we may not have discussed at this point in time, please feel free to use the show conversation chat box that we have. We do have one question that was sent earlier on. So the question was, are there any observations on how the housing rental market is or will be during the COVID situation and after COVID? Would the rental market remain stable, increase, or decrease? So currently, at least across all APAC markets, the rental prices have not changed at this point in time. Now, as markets begin to open up their borders, it really depends on how much fluctuation or how much influx of the volume that we see. So for markets or compounds currently who have high demand, there is little wiggle room to negotiate the rentals down. However, in most locations or in most compounds, we see either a stable or if we do approach those landlords, our destination service provider networks are able to negotiate those rates down. Now, after COVID, again, with depending on the influx of volume, similar to how we see during summer months, prior to COVID, we do expect this to pick up sooner or later. I don't know if anyone wanted to add or anyone had any follow-up question in terms of the rental market.
Casper, maybe I can just add on to it because there's a part of what you said is very true. While we're not seeing any real fluctuations in the rental prices now, I think depending on the speed of the recovery after the pandemic, we might see, as counterintuitive as it is, we might actually see an increase in rental. Because if we do see a V-shaped recovery, which is actually what I think we observed during the 2003 SARS crisis before. I remember that our DSP partners had told us at that time that right after the SARS crisis, there was actually a sort of like a V-shaped spike for close to 3 to 6 months. And when you have a spike in the demand, that's going to drive out some of the prices. I don't think that it's likely, just because the rate of the recovery seems to differ from country to country, continent to continent. So, as countries come out of it, when we're seeing China starting to come out of it, but that doesn't actually do anything to facilitate to address the demand side, just because China is still restricting entry of foreigners into their country, and a lot of countries are still in the midst of the pandemic itself. So we do think that the recovery is just probably going to, instead of a V-shaped one, it's more likely going to be maybe a lower slope upwards.
Okay, thanks, Alzone. There is another question that came in. So if a temporary repatriation of assignees back to their home location, and they do work remotely from there, what are the considerations from a compliance issue standpoint? So, for example, monthly withholding, social security, and tax to be managed. Are there any countries besides Singapore that have officially exempted these during the COVID situation?
Hey, Casper, this is Rudy. Based on what I have seen on the ground, I think each employee situation is very unique and can be complex. So working remotely is basically can be quite tricky, and that can create unforeseen tax burden to the organization. And also it varies country to country, depending where you're coming from and where you're heading back to. I think it would be safe to say that you need to loop in the tax provider or the tax partner on that one to review and look at the scenarios and how this will impact the organization. Whether we are looking at, I think you mentioned temporary. So if it's a temporary measure, I think we need to be very careful on a tax perspective. The immigration also is something that I have seen for a client that have evacuated their temporarily their expats. Immigration will be involved as well to see what can be done and to make sure that the organization remains compliant against the immigration laws. Just to share what I've seen on the ground.
Yeah. Thanks, Rudy. I don't see any additional questions currently on the chat group. But I guess I just wanted to share, apart from, again, going back to the rates and setting expectations on additional costs, while for housing, we don't see current increases right now at this point in time. I think it's conversely different for the household goods shipment, just because of the additional, I guess, the sparse labor resources that each of the countries would have because of the imposed quarantine or lockdown regulations that have been imposed by the government. So most of the increases that we see are in the household goods space. That being said, we do have measures in place with the tools that we have through Acadia. If as a client you are using that, we do try to compare and make sure that we offer the best rates to our clients. But obviously, if we do see any discrepancy in terms of what the normal rates would be like and what they are currently, then we would highlight this back to the client so that you can set the expectations back to the business. Okay. Another question came in. So from an immigration standpoint, what is the situation like in terms of immigration approvals? Are you seeing more delays or more rejections? So I'll take this first. If you are referring to Singapore, we do still see approvals come in, but they are in terms of granting the IPAs or the approvals for the work pass or for the dependent passes. So we do still see an approval of those. However, it has essentially gone down over, I guess, the past couple of weeks. When it comes to the pre-approvals to enter Singapore, for example, the additional approval being given by MOM and ICA, that has dropped drastically. So we've seen a lot of rejections. So previously, MOM wasn't transparent with this. So previously, prior to the circuit breaker being put in place, they were only receiving or they were only giving out approvals for 200 applications. Now they did set the expectations, with our partners over at Fragment, that they will be seeing lesser than that, and it's only exclusive to critical moves within the essential industries like pharmaceutical, medical, as well as transportation. So for other locations, we don't see any rejections per se. However, we do see some delays in the processing time just because of the number one, either influx or volume of the applications, as well as, the government agencies being shut down or having limited working hours, as imposed again by the government. In case, sorry, to focus on Singapore, I guess just harping on the question that was sent on immigration. If it's for Singapore, our partners at Fragment has advised that it is highly encouraged to delay the applications at this point in time, as the government is prioritizing again movements into the country that is really critical and really essential.
Do we have any
Okay.
more questions, Casper?
Sorry, I was on mute. Not at the moment. I guess I just wanted to just maybe wait a little bit in case someone has any other questions before we actually close or wrap up the meeting.
This is Rob. I would also say that, as I said at the beginning, this is the first of a series of sessions, so we would very much welcome your input in terms of designing the next session. So if there are specific topics that you want us to dwell on that can't really be covered in a Q&A, we are very willing to do that, very happy to do that and include it in the next round of the virtual forum. We are likely to invite key partners as well to give perspectives, whether that's on the key areas that Rudy highlighted, could be immigration or household goods or destination services or any of the areas that we're all including in our day-to-day work. So feel free to send your recommendations or requests even through to us to Rachel initially, and we'd be delighted to look at that and then feed that into designing the next session. Casper, any other questions come through?
Yes, there is one, and
Okay.
I think this is, I guess, a good opportunity for everyone, even our participants, to share. Has any of the other companies implemented recovery plans in preparation of life normalizing, hopefully in the medium term?
Well, I guess while everyone is rushing to share their views, probably I can do a sharing. Two of my clients are doing it at this point in time, one of which we are actually doing a project planning. So some of the things that we're taking into consideration, like what I mentioned earlier, we've gone through the slides of how to do planning or some of the things that we need to take into consideration of a day one planning. The key thing now is definitely to look at volume. How many, I guess, in the pipeline will be relocating, and to work very closely with Cartus. So what we've actually been doing is with the client, they have still kept their initiations coming through. They've not kept it, not holding it back, just so that we are able to see where the movements are. So from a project planning perspective, what we've actually done is to split the groups into, or rather bucket them into home host locations. So doing matching in that sense, given that any movements or any lifted restrictions, movements can only take place when both sides of the house, so at the home location as well as the host location, the restrictions are lifted. Because even if you're only looking at one, say for example, if the host location has lifted their restrictions, it's not likely everybody can move, for example, to London at this point in time, because if at home you still have all the restrictions in place, you can't do your departure program. So we've actually split them and bucket them by looking them at a home host. So we've done that done it as a start. Then what we're also doing is to look at staffing numbers. So trying to project plan and say, okay, we make an assumption that some restrictions will likely be, some of the countries would likely lift their restrictions, from July onwards. What will we look like? Okay, we've delayed any starts from the last quarter. We're now going to pile them up from Q2, moving them over to Q3, making sure that from a staffing perspective, we're able to manage and cope with the volume, not only from the Cartus side, but also from the downstream partners. We're also partnering very closely with our downstream partners in terms of, okay, when day one goes, what could it potentially look like? Because when restrictions start to lift, it's not going to be, the next day we're back to normal. It will probably be in phases. So the first group that goes in likely would need extended home temp housing. Are we able to get that temp housing arrangements? Because if we are moving in groups, likelihood, then we're not going to be the only company that's going to be relocating. relocating. Everybody's going to be doing the same. So we could probably look at block booking of temp housing. So that is the first step. So at least the employees, when they're moving into their host locations, they are able to have a place to stay. Then next is looking at the market. That one is quite volatile, and I think it's not, at this point in time, it's hard to make any assumptions, but we do expect markets to pick up slowly, and it could go in different ways, right? It could be limited available properties at that point in time, or suddenly property prices have increased. So what are companies now looking at to be able to support these? So we're looking at a couple of ways to do it, but I definitely would recommend for companies during this period of time to start thinking and start preparing, work closely with your Cartus management team to be able to project plan some of these. You can kind of do an assumption base and see how that would look like. I'm not giving a lot more information because we've shared some of those preparation earlier, but some of these things you really need to consider is, project planning, as well as staffing capabilities. And I'm sure a lot more people would want to jump in and share.
Yeah, I think Rita, who thank you so much, Rita, for the question. She also commented her thanks to you. And I think companies will assess the risk or corporate risk appetite and also the risk profile of individual assignees. So likely only short-term assignments will kick off without dependents so that they can be pulled back.
Mm.
And
Um,
also, I guess to add, sorry, Alzone, just to add, I think there are companies right now who have not put a stop to their volume. So there are people already in the waiting or in the queue to actually relocate as soon as all these restrictions are
Mm.
lifted. And I think, again, dependent on the situation, whether or not they have the immigration approvals there, or whether or not it's business critical. So whatever Jolene had discussed in assessing, I guess, the situation,
Mm.
I think that still applies in terms of, trying to prioritize the people whom we will be giving, the resources that we have to them. And again, assessing the business criticality of each assignment to see whether or not we need them ASAP in the location, or we would need to assess whether or not it's still acceptable for them to relocate at a much later time.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Casper. I'll just add a couple of points to this, and it's relating to the question of whether companies have started to implement recovery plans. And to be honest, looking across the client organizations that we have, I would say that the vast majority of them are still in the midst of dealing with the COVID-19 situation and the ever-changing impact that it has for the employees around the different countries that they're going to, or the different cities that they are in, because regulations and the development of the crisis can change within a matter of days or weeks. This has kind of, to a certain extent, made it extremely challenging to look beyond the near horizon, of dealing with the crisis. So, if anyone's sort of feeling like they're not ahead of the curve at this point in time, I would say that that's probably somewhat normal. The other part of it is that there are some countries where the crisis is maybe we're starting to see recovery. And in those locations where we have clients that have evacuated their assignees out of those locations, I think the challenge, and this is not across the board, I think it's just the occasional one or two challenges that we have seen. It's about getting those assignees back into location now, because I think um, the mindset of an employee and the family after being evacuated out due to a crisis situation and then being asked to go back in, the mental and I think emotional challenge of overcoming that is it's there. And it's something that I think those are companies that have brought it up to us that they're trying to manage through. The other part of it is there are this particular set of crisis has kind of pushed us into an environment where a lot of new things that were not the norm is suddenly the norm now. So telecommuting, remote working, even home-based learning for kids, all of this are something that we're being forced to do at this point in time as we're being asked to stay at home. And with this, I think there's new possibilities in terms of, because we know that the way that we move people, relocation trends tend to follow demographic trends. So if you think about just how that kind of lines up, if there is an increasing possibility of telecommuting, if there's increasing possibility of home-based learning for children, then that could also signify a change in, say, assignees in the policies that you might have for your employees in the future. You might see, a change in the willingness to accept, say, a short-term unaccompanied assignment, because, if students can complete their schooling remotely and do their home-based learning efficiently, then there's nothing to really kind of stop a child or family from moving along, except for maybe the company's policy does not support that. So there are some companies that are discussing this, but again, it's not the norm. It just maybe could be one or 2 minutes breather that they got from dealing with the day-to-day crisis. They got to think about the future, maybe. But that's just one of those things that I think, if we start to look forward to a time where this is behind us, then potentially that could be something that we are looking at as well, a new working norm, a new family norm in a sense.
Great, thank you, Alzone. I understand there aren't any more questions at this point. And so we will wrap up the session for today. I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody for taking the time out and joining. And a reminder here up on the screen that you can access resources at cartus.com/coronavirus, including the white paper that was mentioned earlier on today. As I said as well, please do send suggestions through to Rachel, rachel.fu@cartus.com, with regard to what do you want to see in the next session. We will design it based on feedback and based on what we're seeing as well, of course. Okay, I think that is it. Again, thank you very much to the team here at Cartus for putting this together and presenting, and thank you to everyone who's taken the time to dial in. It's very much appreciated. Thank you, and stay safe.